Chapter 1. The Question That Lands. Marsha Rose woke before her alarm, which was unusual enough that she lay still for a moment, blinking at the ceiling and listening to the dull hum of the city outside her apartment window. Zurich mornings were polite. Even the traffic sounded as if it were clearing its throat. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand at exactly 7:30, right on schedule. She reached for it without looking, silenced it, and exhaled. Another weekday, another predictable rhythm. She didn't mind predictability, kept the noise down. Marsha moved through her morning the way she did most things, efficiently and without drama. Shower, coffee, blouse pressed the night before because she hated rushing, hair pulled into a low twist that made her look older than 27 in a way people respected but didn't question. When she checked her reflection by the door, she tilted her head slightly, assessing. Competent, awake, put together. That was good enough. Her office job, operations coordinator at a mid-sized logistics firm, was not anyone's childhood dream. It paid well enough, the hours were reasonable, and no one expected Marsha to perform emotional gymnastics disguised as ambition. She liked knowing exactly what was required of her. She liked delivering. By mid-morning, she had already resolved a scheduling conflict, corrected a forecasting error no one else had caught yet, and fielded a panicked email from a vendor with the calm of someone who had learned that most urgency was artificial. Marsha, her manager called gently from the doorway, one eyebrow lifted in invitation rather than command. Vivian Keller never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Marsha rolled her chair back and smiled. "What's up?" Vivian stepped in, holding her tablet against her chest. In her early 50s, always impeccably dressed, always calm, Vivian had mastered the art of looking unbothered by chaos while quietly commanding it. "I just wanted to say thank you," Vivian said. "The revised workflow you suggested yesterday? It saved us a headache this morning." Marsha shrugged. It was an obvious fix. Vivian smiled as if Marsha had just confirmed something she already knew. "We'll talk later," she said and left. Marsha watched her go, a faint tightness settling behind her ribs. "We'll talk later" was Vivian's way of leaving doors open and trusting Marsha to notice. She spent the rest of the day doing what she always did, working diligently, avoiding unnecessary attention, telling herself she preferred it that way. Sunday afternoon arrived softly, like it always did. The cafe on the corner of Marktgasse had been their place for years now. Neutral enough to feel timeless, comfortable enough to invite honesty without demanding it. Daniel was already there when Marsha arrived, seated by the window with a mug cradled in both hands. He looked up when she pushed the door open, his face splitting into a smile that was immediate and unguarded. "There she is," he said, standing halfway before catching himself and settling back down. Marsha laughed as she slid into the chair across from him. "You say that every week, and yet you still show up." "Habit," she said lightly. Daniel's eyes flicked to her face, lingering just long enough to suggest he heard the part she didn't say. They ordered automatically. Black coffee for him, oat milk cappuccino for her. Neither commented on it. Some rituals didn't need narration. "So," Daniel said after the first sip, "how's life as the voice of modern dating wisdom?" Marsha groaned. "Don't call it that." "You call it that," he countered, just without the sarcasm. She smiled despite herself. "We had a panel this week. 3 women. All brilliant. All furious. That tracks." "They weren't furious with me," she clarified. "Just men." Daniel waited. He was good at that. Never rushed her into finishing a thought she hadn't fully shaped yet. "One of them said," Marsha continued, "that women need to stop lowering their standards just to make men feel comfortable." Daniel took another sip, eyes neutral. "And?" he prompted. "And I agreed," she said. "Mostly. I mean, no one should settle, right?" Daniel's mouth twitched. "Define settle." She raised an eyebrow. "You're already doing the thing." "I like the thing," he said mildly. Marsha leaned back, crossing her arms. Not defensively, but as if bracing for weather. "Fine. I know what you're going to ask. Do you? Do I want the comfortable lie or the blunt truth?" And she didn't answer immediately. Outside the window, a cyclist coasted past, scarf flapping lazily behind him. "Truth," she said. "Go ahead." Daniel exhaled through his nose, smiling. "All right, you run a dating podcast about finding a good man. Yes, and you bring on guests who talk about landing this rare, ideal guy you all seem to be chasing. Yes, that," he said gently, "is like the blind teaching the deaf how to read sheet music." Marsha blinked. Not because she was offended, because she wasn't. Because she hadn't expected clarity so quickly. "Explain," she said. "You keep telling people how to do something you haven't done," he said. "That doesn't make you wrong. But it does matter." "I know what I want," she said. "I believe you. I'm not going to settle." He tilted his head. "When you say that, settle, what do you mean?" She frowned, searching. "I mean, not getting what I want." Daniel nodded slowly. "Okay, then here's the question." He met her eyes, expression open, unthreatening. "Is what you want what you deserve?" Her breath caught, just slightly. "What does that mean?" she asked. It means wanting something doesn't automatically entitle you to it, he said. What have you done to earn the kind of man you describe? She opened her mouth, closed it again. I'm not saying you haven't, he added quickly. I'm asking if you've ever thought about it. That feels unfair, she said. Maybe, he agreed. But listen, every episode one hear long lists of what men need to be before they qualify. Money, status, emotional intelligence, stability, integrity. As they should, she said. Sure, he said. But I never hear the counterpart. What does a woman need to be to keep a man like that, besides attractive and interested? That one landed hard enough that Marsha laughed, a sharp sound that surprised them both. You think all we offer is sex? She asked. No, Daniel said calmly. I think that's all your advice prepares them to offer. She stared at him, heart thudding, mind spinning. Daniel leaned back, hands lifting slightly. I'm not attacking you. I know, she said, and realized it was true. I just think, he continued, you're very good at seeing what other people should bring to the table. I don't know if you've ever stopped to ask what you do. Silence settled between them, not awkward, heavy. Marsha looked down at her coffee, long since gone cold. No one had ever asked her that before. Not really. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure if she liked the answer she was forming, or if she was brave enough to chase it. Chapter 2, Diamonds and Waiting Rooms. Marsha did not sleep well after Sunday. It wasn't dramatic insomnia. No staring at the ceiling until dawn. No spiraling panic. It was worse in its subtlety. She slept in fragments, slipping in and out of half-dreams where conversation replayed itself in new configurations, as if her mind were editing a film it hadn't realized it had been watching. Is what you want what you deserve? The question didn't hurt. That was the problem. It simply existed, solid and undeniable, like furniture she kept bumping into in the dark. Monday morning arrived whether she was ready or not. The office smelled faintly of printer toner and brewed coffee when Marsha walked in, the familiar comfort of routine settling over her like a well-worn coat. She checked her inbox, prioritized tasks, and lost herself in the kind of ordered problem-solving she excelled at. Numbers behaved. Processes followed logic. If something went wrong, there was always a fix. People were messier. Late morning, Vivian appeared again in the doorway, tablet tucked under her arm. This time she didn't preface her presence with praise. Do you have 10 minutes? Vivian asked. Marsha hesitated only long enough to save her document. Sure. Vivian gestured down the hall. Let's take the small conference room. It was a quiet space, glass-walled but private, used mostly for interviews and conversations people didn't want overheard. Marsha felt a faint tightening in her chest as she followed. Not fear, anticipation. Vivian sat across from her, folding her hands neatly. For a moment, she said nothing, simply studied Marsha with an expression that was not critical, but thoughtful. Tell me something, Vivian said at last. Are you bored? Marsha blinked. Excuse me? Not unhappy, Vivian clarified. Not ungrateful, just unchallenged. I like my work, Marsha said carefully. I know you do, and I do it well. You do, Vivian agreed, which is why I'm asking. Marsha shifted slightly in her chair. I don't see the issue. Vivian smiled, not indulgently, not patronizingly, just knowingly. You make your job look easy, she said. That usually means two things. Either it truly is, or you've outgrown it. Marsha laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. I'm not looking for a promotion. I didn't say anything about a promotion. You didn't have to. Vivian leaned back, crossing one ankle over the other. I've been managing people for a long time, Marsha. There's a specific kind of talent that doesn't advertise itself. It waits. It does what needs to be done. It tells itself its content because contentment is safe. Marsha felt uncomfortably seen. I don't feel stuck, she said. No, Vivian said easily. You don't. Because stuck implies frustration. And you're too capable to be frustrated. The room fell quiet. Outside the glass wall, co-workers passed, unaware that Marsha's internal scaffolding was being gently tested for load-bearing truth. Vivian tapped her tablet once, then set it aside. There's a new team forming next quarter, she said. The responsibilities will be heavier, the visibility higher. I need someone steady, someone thoughtful, someone who doesn't need to be loud to be effective. Marsha's instinctive response rose immediately. I'm not ready. She swallowed it. I'll consider it, she said instead. Vivian smiled, a small, satisfied curve of her mouth. That's all I'm asking. Daniel spent his Monday lunch break walking. He always did when his thoughts needed somewhere to go. The route traced the river, winding past benches and cyclists and tourists who stopped abruptly to take photos of things the locals passed without notice. He liked the predictability of it, the uninterrupted movement. He hadn't meant to unsettle Marsha on Sunday, at least not in the sense of causing harm. But honesty, he had learned, was often disruptive simply because it demanded adjustment. He respected her too much for comfortable lies. Still, her face when the question landed thoughtful, not defensive, had stayed with him. That was the thing about Marsha. She didn't lash out when challenged. She paused, considered, let quiet in. Not everyone knew how to do that. Daniel sat on a bench overlooking the water and pulled his phone from his pocket. He opened the podcast app, thumb hovering over Marsha's latest episode. He didn't press play. Instead, he locked the screen and slipped the phone away. Some conversations were better left to percolate. By Wednesday evening, Marsha had listened back to 3 old podcast episodes. She did it in her apartment studio, perched on the edge of her desk with a notebook in her lap she hadn't originally intended to use. The room was warm with late spring air, the faint hum of city life drifting in through an open window. At first, she listened like she always did, tracking sound quality, pacing, moments where she could tighten the edit. Then something shifted. She started hearing the patterns Daniel had pointed out. The repeated emphasis on what men lacked. The unspoken assumption that desirability operated in one direction. When a guest joked that, if he's not bringing at least 6 figures and emotional availability, what's the point? Marsha felt a flicker of discomfort she had never noticed before. What am I bringing? The question whispered. She paused the recording and stared at the wall. Her apartment was tidy, thoughtfully decorated. Not staged, intentional. She had built a life carefully, piece by piece. Financially stable, emotionally regulated, surrounded by friends who checked in and mattered. So why did the question feel unfair? She closed the notebook without writing anything and leaned back in her chair. Somewhere, deep down, she recognized the answer forming, but it wasn't ready to be articulated yet. Friday afternoon delivered clarity in an unexpected package. A junior analyst knocked lightly on Marsha's desk. Hesitation etched into his posture. Hey, Marsha? Do you have a minute? She looked up. Of course. What's going on? He explained a problem with a report, something minor but time-sensitive. As he spoke, Marsha listened, asked a question or two, then walked him through a solution with practiced ease. His shoulders relaxed visibly as she talked. Thank you, he said when they finished. I always feel better after asking you. Marsha smiled. That's what I'm here for. As he walked away, it hit her. Not all at once, but steadily. This was what earning looked like. Not demanding, not listing, not wanting, showing up, being reliable, creating space where others felt steady enough to grow. Later that evening, alone in her apartment, Marsha poured a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the city lights arrange themselves into quiet order. She wasn't offended by Daniel's question anymore. She was curious, and curiosity, she was beginning to realize, was far more dangerous, because it didn't let you go back to sleep. Chapter 3, The Podcast Problem. The red recording light had never made Marsha nervous before. She noticed it immediately when she pressed the button, that precise little glow above the microphone that marked the point of no return. Once it was on, she couldn't rethink her phrasing or circle back without sounding uncertain. Clarity had always been her strength. Conviction, her currency. Tonight, the light felt heavier. Marsha slid her headphones into place and adjusted the mic, smoothing the cuff of her sweater as if the fabric might betray her unease. Across from her, seated on the studio couch she'd obsessed over choosing 3 years earlier, were her guests for the evening, Lila and Noor. Smart, articulate, confident women in their early 30s with careers they'd built intentionally and opinions sharpened by experience. This was a good panel. Should have been easy. Welcome back to Clear Intentions, Marsha said, voice steady, practiced. Tonight we're talking about standards, what they are, why they matter, and how to hold on to them without apology. Lila smiled approvingly. Noor nodded, folding her legs comfortably beneath her. Marsha guided them through the opening segment, the conversation flowing the way it always did. Dating fatigue, emotional labor, the frustration of feeling like you had to explain your worth to men who should already recognize it. She had said these things herself dozens of times. But tonight, something felt different, not wrong, exactly, but tilted, like listening to a familiar song played in a different key. I think women are done compromising, Lila said firmly. If he doesn't meet your standards out of the gate, that's not your problem to fix. Exactly, Noor agreed. We've normalized settling just to keep options around. That's a disservice to ourselves. Marsha nodded automatically. So how do you distinguish between settling and being realistic? Noor scoffed softly. Why is that always the question? Marsha blinked. What do you mean? Men aren't told to be realistic about what they want, Noor said. Women are. Constantly. Lila leaned forward. I think being realistic is just coded language for lowering the bar. The words landed neatly, convincingly. And yet, Marsha felt the faintest hitch behind her sternum. She watched her guests speak, listened to them articulate the position she had co-signed for years, and heard Daniel's voice in her head, not contradicting them, exactly, but asking, what are you earning? She pressed on, professionally. So what would you say to listeners who feel like their standards keep leading them to disappointing outcomes? Lila laughed. That's the men, not the standards. Noor snapped her fingers. Yes, that part. The conversation continued, polished and impassioned. When they wrapped, Marsha thanked them sincerely and walked them out with hugs and promises to send the episode link. As soon as the door closed behind them, the apartment seemed to exhale. Marsha stood alone in her studio, surrounded by carefully positioned sound panels and framed prints she'd chosen to project warmth and credibility. The red light was off. The silence felt louder than the recording ever had. She sank into her desk chair and stared at the monitor. For the first time since starting the podcast, she didn't open the editing software right away. Instead, she pulled up the raw audio and rewound, not to the beginning but to the moment, nor scoffed. Why is that always the question? Marsha replayed it 3 times. Then again, slower. She wasn't sure what she was listening for. A mistake? A crack? What she heard instead was certainty. Unexamined. Unchallenged. She swallowed. Half an hour later, her phone buzzed on the desk. Daniel, coffee tomorrow? Same time? Her thumb hovered. For years, Sunday had been automatic. No negotiation. No subtext. She typed back. Marsha, can we do Monday instead? I need to process something. The reply came quickly. Daniel, of course. Want me to listen or just sit there quietly and drink coffee? A corner of her mouth lifted despite the tension tightening her shoulders. Marsha, I don't know yet. Daniel, then I'll bring both options. She set the phone face down and leaned back, closing her eyes. Monday morning punished her for her restless night. She sat at her desk with a mug that had gone untouched, staring at a spreadsheet she'd already corrected twice. Numbers blurred. Her thoughts kept circling, refusing to land. At 10:45, Vivian stopped by again. This time, she didn't wait for an invitation. Walk with me, Vivian said. They took the stairs down to the building's ground floor atrium, the quiet echo of footfalls accompanying them. You look distracted, Vivian said mildly. I'm fine, Marsha said, too quickly. Vivian gave her a look. That's not what I said. Marsha exhaled. I'm just thinking about whether I've mistaken certainty for clarity, Marsha said, surprising herself. Vivian stopped near a window overlooking the street. That's a dangerous realization, she said. It usually precedes change. Marsha laughed under her breath. I'm not great with change. No, Vivian said. You're excellent at preparation. She turned to face Marsha fully. Tell me this. When you think about that team I mentioned, what scares you? That I won't be good enough, Marsha said immediately. Vivian nodded. And what excites you? Marsha hesitated. Then, quietly, that I might be. Vivian smiled. There it is. The cafe smelled like roasted beans and rain-damp coats when Marsha arrived that evening. Daniel was already there. Of course he was, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when she approached, reading her face with the ease of familiarity. Hi, he said. Hi. They ordered in silence this time, the barista's practiced cheer filling the gaps neither of them rushed to close. When they sat down, Daniel waited. Marsha wrapped her hands around her mug. I think I've been doing something dishonest, she said finally. With others? He asked gently. With myself. He nodded, encouraging but not interrupting. I listened to myself talk on the podcast, she continued. And for the first time, I realized I've been very focused on what women are entitled to, without being nearly as curious about what makes a partnership actually work. Daniel shifted slightly in his seat. That's a hard distinction to see from the inside. I kept telling myself I wasn't settling, she said. But I think maybe I've been waiting for something to arrive already complete, Marsha said. So I wouldn't have to risk being unfinished. Daniel studied her for a long moment. That's a very human impulse. I don't want to turn my podcast into a lecture, she said. But I don't want to keep ignoring the blind spots either. What do you want it to be? He asked. Marsha stared into her coffee, steam curling upward like a question mark. Honest, even when it's uncomfortable. Daniel smiled slowly. That might change everything. Marsha looked up. Including how people see me. Especially how you see yourself, he said softly. Something settled then, not resolution but readiness. Marsha took a breath. I think I want to try something different next episode. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Do tell. I want to talk about contribution, she said. Not just selection. About becoming someone a good man would want to stay with. Not because he owes you, but because he chooses you. Daniel leaned back, impressed. That's brave. It's terrifying, she corrected. He grinned. Same thing, usually. They sat there a while longer, talking, not debating, not dissecting. Just speaking honestly in the way that had always been their strength. When Marsha walked home later, the city lights felt less distant. She didn't have answers yet. But for the first time, she wasn't waiting in the wings of her own life. She was stepping toward the mic. Chapter 4, the experiment. The idea came to Marsha at 2:13 in the morning, which was how she knew it was either brilliant or deeply inconvenient. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, phone warm in her hand as she scrolled through listener emails she'd previously archived for later consideration. Most of them followed the same familiar pattern. Frustration, indignation, certainty wrapped around disappointment like a scarf pulled too tight. One email stopped her thumb. I don't think my standards are wrong, the woman had written. But every date feels like I'm interviewing someone who already knows he won't take the job. Marsha read it twice. Then she smiled, slow and thoughtful. By the time her alarm went off 4 hours later, the idea had solidified into a plan she was both excited by and mildly afraid of. An uncomfortable but unmistakable pairing she was learning to recognize as growth. At the office, she moved through her workday with an unusual lightness. The team project Vivian had mentioned now had a formal outline, and Marsha found herself volunteering input without immediately qualifying it. She caught Vivian watching her once, an unreadable expression on her face that looked suspiciously like approval. At lunch, Marsha texted Daniel. Marsha, I'm doing a thing. Daniel, that's delightfully vague. Should I be concerned? Marsha, I'm redesigning the podcast. For 1 episode. Daniel, should I cancel my plans to say, I told you so? Or are you okay? Marsha, neither. I need your help. The typing bubble appeared almost instantly. Daniel, that's more concerning. That evening, Daniel sat cross-legged on Marsha's studio floor, surrounded by cables, microphones, and a whiteboard she had pulled from the closet with ceremonial gravity. So, he said, glancing between her and the whiteboard, talk me through this before I assume you've joined a commune or decided to burn down dating culture. Marsha laughed, uncapping a marker. It's an experiment. Those have a mixed record in your life, he noted. I know, she said. That's why you're here. She turned to the board and wrote in large letters. The outside the type project. Daniel tilted his head. Catchy. I'm dedicating a full episode to dating intentionally outside my stated preferences, she said. Not as punishment. Not as a lecture. As research. Daniel raised a finger. Define outside. Men I would usually dismiss early, Marsha said. Different careers. Different personalities. Different trajectories. Different heights? He asked. She gave him a look. Kidding, he said. Mostly. I want to document the process honestly, she continued. What I notice. What surprises me. What doesn't. And, she hesitated, then added, what I bring to the interaction. Daniel leaned back on his hands. Listeners are going to have opinions. I know. Some of them unkind. I know that too. He studied her for a long moment. Why do it publicly? Marsha hesitated, searching for the precise truth. Because I can't ask other women to interrogate their assumptions if I won't do it myself. Daniel smiled, slow and proud. That's inconveniently admirable. Will you help me? She asked. Help me design it, Marsha said. And, she grimaced slightly, keep me honest. That's a dangerous request, he said lightly. I trust you. The words landed between them, familiar and weighted in equal measure. Daniel nodded once. Then yes. The first date was with a man named Lucas. He was a civil engineer specializing in public transport infrastructure, which Marsha knew because his profile mentioned it 3 separate times. She matched with him because his bio was relaxed, humorous, and entirely devoid of buzzwords. Coffee, not cocktails. Sunday morning, not Friday night. Already unusual. Lucas arrived early, wearing sneakers that had clearly been worn for comfort rather than aesthetic. He smiled easily when he saw her and didn't comment on her appearance at all beyond a simple, "It's nice to meet you." They talked about Zurich, about bike lanes, ironically, and Marsha found herself laughing more than she'd expected. Lucas listened without interrupting, asked thoughtful follow-ups, paid without making a point of it. When he hugged her goodbye, it was warm and brief. On her walk home, Marsha waited for the familiar rush, the mental checklist, the verdict. It didn't come. Instead, she realized something unsettling. She hadn't once wondered whether Lucas was impressive enough for her friends. The second date, a week later, was with Aaron, a primary school teacher who told her up front that he was allergic to dating apps and only there because his sister had insisted. Fair warning, he said over tea. I talk about my students too much. He was right. He did. He also spoke about them with a tenderness Marsha hadn't known how to categorize before. He asked her questions that reflected genuine interest rather than polite assessment. When she talked about the podcast, he didn't try to debate her points. He asked what she loved about it. She left that date conflicted in a new way. Not disappointed. Not thrilled. Curious. By the fourth date, with a man in IT who baked bread as a stress relief mechanism, Marsha realized something else. Something that made her chest tighten with recognition. She was calmer. She wasn't performing. She wasn't auditioning them or herself. She showed up as is and paid attention to how she felt during the interaction rather than grading it after. That Sunday evening, she sat across from Daniel at their usual cafe, stirring her cappuccino absently. I don't know what I'm doing, she admitted. Daniel smiled faintly. That's usually progress. I always thought dating was about sorting, she said. Eliminating. Finding the best option. And now it feels more like alignment, Marsha said slowly. Like I'm noticing how energy flows rather than how resumes look. Daniel nodded. How's that feel? Humbling, she said. And relieving. She hesitated, then added, also mildly annoying. Why annoying? Because I can't believe how much I discounted before, Marsha said. Not just in men. In myself. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Marsha, he said carefully, what are you most afraid your listeners will say? She thought about it. That I've lowered my standards. And what do you think? I think I've finally figured out the difference between standards and expectations, she said. Standards are about values. Expectations are about fantasies. Daniel smiled, wide and genuine. That's a line worth recording. Marsha laughed. Don't tempt me. The episode aired 2 weeks later. Reaction was immediate. Some praised her honesty. Some accused her of backpedaling. One email called her a traitor to modern women. Marsha read them all. Then she recorded the follow-up. I'm not telling anyone to want less, she said into the mic, voice steady. I'm asking us to consider how we want. Because relationships aren't won. They're built. The red light blinked off. For the first time since starting the podcast, Marsha didn't feel like she was teaching. She felt like she was learning out loud. And strangely enough, that felt like the most honest place she'd ever been. Chapter 5, The Blind Spot. It started inconveniently with a calendar notification. Marsha was halfway through editing a client response email when her phone lit up beside her keyboard. Sunday coffee? Daniel. She stared at it longer than necessary. The question mark was new. For years, Sunday coffee had been immovable. A fixture, like daylight savings being annoying or trains running mostly on time. They both knew when to show up. Neither of them ever asked. She tapped the notification to open the message thread. Before she could reply, another message arrived. Daniel, I might need to push this week. Have a date. Marsha's fingers went still. She didn't feel jealous. Not exactly. What she felt was unsettled. As if someone had moved a piece of furniture in her living room by 2 inches. Enough that she noticed every time she crossed the space. Marsha. Oh, okay. Have fun. The reply came quickly. Daniel, thanks. Rain check. She typed of course and hit send, then placed the phone back on the desk with deliberate calm. Only then did she realize her stomach felt hollow. The date was uneventful, on Daniel's end. The woman was kind, engaged, and pleasant. They talked easily, laughed at the same things. She asked thoughtful questions about his work and didn't flinch when he admitted he preferred early mornings to late nights. You're very self-aware, she said over dessert. Daniel smiled politely. Years of practice. At the end of the evening, she hugged him warmly and said she'd like to see him again. He meant it when he said he would think about it. What surprised him was who immediately came to mind afterward. Marsha spent Sunday restless in a way she couldn't quite justify. She cleaned an already clean apartment, reorganized her notes for the next podcast episode twice, listened to a voice memo from a listener praising the experiment and felt bizarrely distant from the validation. At one point, she opened Daniel's contact just to scroll through old messages, as if looking for proof of continuity. She stopped herself. This is normal, she told herself. Friends date. Adults adjust. Still, when Sunday evening passed without the familiar coffee ritual, something quiet inside her registered its absence. They met on Tuesday instead. Same cafe, same orders, different air. Daniel arrived first this time, standing when he saw her, smiling in the same easy way, but Marsha noticed the extra space he left when they hugged. Not distance, awareness. So, she said, settling into her seat. How was the date? He searched her face briefly before answering. Good, he said honestly. Easy. Easy is good, she said, nodding. It is, he agreed. But it's not everything. Marsha stirred her cappuccino, watching the foam swirl. You don't owe me a debrief, she said. I know, he said. I'm choosing to give one. She looked up. She's great, Daniel continued. But I kept noticing how much I was explaining myself. Not defensively, just contextualizing. You don't like having to translate who you are, Marsha said. He smiled faintly. You've always been good at reading me. The words landed gently, but they stayed. And you? He asked. How are you feeling about all of this? Marsha hesitated. About dating? About the podcast? About him being elsewhere on a Sunday afternoon where she usually lived comfortably in the center of his week? I'm realizing something, she said slowly. I think I've been treating our friendship like an emotional constant. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Is that a bad thing? No, she said. But I don't think I noticed how much I relied on it. He considered that. Relied how? Marsha exhaled. You're my place to land, to test ideas, to decompress. And I don't mean that selfishly. I give to you too. But I think I assumed you would always be here. Daniel nodded, expression thoughtful rather than defensive. I have been. I know, she said. That's the blind spot. I never questioned whether I should be building that level of emotional availability with someone else. Silence stretched, not tense, but weighted. Daniel broke it first. I don't feel used, if that's what you're worried about. I am worried about it, she admitted. I feel respected by you, he said. Always have. But I also think you're right. We've been efficient with each other. She laughed quietly. That's such a terrible and accurate word. He smiled. We fit easily. That doesn't guarantee anything, she said. No, he agreed. But it counts for something. She held his gaze a second longer than necessary, and something unspoken flickered between them. Recognition without urgency. Daniel shifted slightly, breaking it. For what it's worth, he added. Going on that date clarified something for me too. She waited. I want a partner I don't have to perform for, he said. Someone who already sees me. Marsha's throat tightened. That sounds familiar. He smiled, not unkindly. It should. 2 weeks later, Marsha found herself sitting across from Aaron again. The teacher. On what had unexpectedly become a third date. They talked over dinner this time, candles flickering softly between them. You seem different, Aaron observed midway through a story about a student who insisted pigeons were undercover government drones. Marsha laughed. Different how? More present, he said. Like you're not grading me in your head anymore. She smiled sheepishly. I probably was before. I figured, he said easily. You strike me as a systems person. That night, as she walked home, Marsha felt something gentle and unfamiliar. Not excitement, not infatuation, but possibility without pressure. When her phone buzzed, she expected Daniel's name. It wasn't. It was Aaron, thanking her for the evening. She smiled as she typed back. The real reckoning didn't arrive dramatically. It came on an ordinary Wednesday evening, when Marsha finished recording and reached instinctively for her phone to call Daniel, and stopped. She set the phone down slowly. Not because she couldn't call him, because she recognized, finally, the difference between wanting support and defaulting to it. She texted him instead. Marsha, I'm learning how to stand on my own a little better. Just wanted you to know. The reply took longer this time. When it came, it was simple. Daniel, I'm glad. That's a good thing. She smiled. For the first time, she understood that the deepest intimacy wasn't constant proximity. It was choice made consciously without assumption. And that realization, as uncomfortable as it was, felt like growth. Even if she didn't yet know what it would cost, or give her in return. Chapter 6, Misalignment. The first real fracture didn't happen during an argument. It happened quietly, which somehow made it worse. Marsha realized it on a Thursday evening when she reached for her phone. Again and stopped again and felt something tighten instead of settle. The instinct was still there. The habit. But the comfort that had always followed it was gone. Replaced by a faint, disorienting awareness that everything between her and Daniel was no longer self-maintaining. Not broken. Just no longer automatic. She hated how much that mattered. The podcast episode following the Outside the Type project was the most listened to one she'd ever released. It was also the most divisive. Marsha sat cross-legged on her couch, laptop open. Scrolling through feedback, she told herself she'd stop reading 10 minutes earlier. Some messages were thoughtful, even grateful. Women thanking her for articulating doubts they hadn't known how to express. Others were not. You sound like you're apologizing for having standards. This feels like a pivot toward male comfort. You were braver before. That one lingered. She closed her laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, the criticism didn't make her defensive. It made her tired. Her phone buzzed. Aaron. Had a great time last night. Want to cook dinner together this weekend? She smiled, small and genuine. Aaron was kind in a way that didn't require deciphering. Respectful without performance. Present without pressure. Marsha, I'd like that. She hit send, then sat there longer than necessary, thumb hovering. She didn't text Daniel. Daniel noticed the distance before he named it. It showed up in small ways. Longer response times, fewer spontaneous thoughts shared, Sunday mornings no longer reflexively reserved. He told himself it was healthy. Necessary even. But self-awareness didn't erase feeling. He saw Marsha's latest episode pop up on his feed and let it sit unwatched for 2 days before pressing play. He listened carefully like he always had, but this time he was aware of what wasn't there. The space she'd created for herself. He respected it. He also felt it. The misunderstanding arrived dressed as thoughtfulness. Marsha was halfway through chopping vegetables in her kitchen on Saturday night when another notification lit up her phone. Daniel, hey, just checking in. Not trying to interrupt your life. Just wanted to see how you're doing. She stared at the screen, knife paused midair. Not trying to interrupt your life. Something in her bristled. She wiped her hands on a towel and typed. Marsha, you're not interrupting. But I'm trying to be more intentional about where I put my energy. She reread it twice. It sounded composed. Reasonable. The reply took a moment longer than usual. Daniel, got it. I didn't realize I was an energy drain. Her chest tightened. That wasn't what she meant. She typed quickly. Marsha, that's not what I'm saying. Dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Daniel, Marsha, you don't need to explain. I support you figuring things out. I just need to know where I fit now. She set the phone down. Not because she didn't care. Because she didn't yet know the answer. They didn't see each other the following week. No fight. No declaration. Just a growing absence that spread into the spaces where familiarity used to live. Marsha told herself it was growing pains. Necessary recalibration. At night, lying in bed, she discovered a new, unwelcome truth. Being independent wasn't the same as being alone. And she might have confused the two for far too long. The confrontation, if it could be called that, happened at the cafe they both pretended no longer belonged to them. Marsha was there with her laptop, intending to work, when she looked up and saw Daniel pause just inside the door, scanning the room. Their eyes locked. For a second, neither moved. Then Daniel walked over. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she replied. Awkwardness settled where ease used to be. He gestured to the chair across from her. "Is this occupied?" She shook her head. "No. Sit." They ordered out of habit, then sat staring at mugs neither of them touched. "This feels ridiculous," Marsha said finally. Daniel smiled faintly. "Agreed." She took a breath. "I didn't mean to imply you were a drain." "I know," he said. "But I think I also know what you were trying to do." "Then tell me," she said softly. "You were trying to grow," Daniel said. "And in doing so, you realized how much space I occupied in your life." She nodded. "Yes. And instead of renegotiating it," he continued, "you stepped back entirely." Her throat tightened. "I didn't want to default to you anymore." "That's fair," he said. "But it also felt like being quietly demoted without explanation." The honesty stung because it was accurate. "I didn't know how to adjust without hurting you," Marsha admitted. He looked at her then. Really looked. "Marsha, you don't hurt me by growing. You hurt me by disappearing." Silence stretched between them, full and heavy. "I don't want to go back to how it was," she said finally. "I shouldn't rely on you the way I did." "I don't want that either," Daniel said. "But I also don't want to pretend what we have is insignificant." "It isn't," she said quickly. "Then what is it?" he asked. She opened her mouth, closed it. "I don't know yet," she said. "And that scares me." Daniel nodded slowly. "Me too." They sat there longer, neither reaching for the easy reassurance they were both capable of offering. When Daniel stood to leave, he hesitated. "For what it's worth, I'm not asking you to choose me." Marsha looked up. "I'm asking you not to erase me," he said gently. She smiled, sad and grateful all at once. "I won't." That night, Marsha lay awake listening to the city shift around her. She thought about Aaron's warm steadiness, Vivian's patient belief, Daniel's quiet presence, no longer constant, but undeniably formative. For the first time, she understood that alignment wasn't just about romantic compatibility. It was about learning how to hold multiple truths without collapsing into avoidance or dependency. She placed a hand over her chest, feeling the steady rhythm there. Growth, she realized, wasn't clean. Sometimes it looked like loss. Sometimes it felt like loneliness. And sometimes, most uncomfortably of all, it required her to sit in uncertainty without reaching for the nearest familiar hand. Tomorrow, she would keep moving forward. But tonight, she allowed herself to miss him, and to trust that missing someone didn't mean she had made the wrong choice. Chapter 7, What Growth Looks Like. The promotion didn't arrive with confetti. It came in an email sent at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning, sandwiched between a meeting reminder and a vendor invoice, as if the universe were daring Marsha to miss it. Subject: Team Lead Assignment, Q3 Initiative. She read it once, then again slower. Vivian was concise, as always. The new cross-functional team would pilot a logistics overhaul for one of their largest clients. Increased visibility, increased responsibility, direct reports, decision-making authority. At the end of the email, a single line stood apart from the rest. "I believe you're ready whether you feel like it yet or not." Marsha closed her laptop and sat very still. Her first instinct was not excitement. It was grief. Grief for the version of herself who had been able to say, "I'm doing fine where I am," and believe it. For the quiet safety of competence without consequence. For the comfort of not being seen too clearly. She stood, walked to the window, and let the city settle her. Trams slid along their tracks with unbothered precision. Pedestrians waited patiently at crosswalks. Motion without panic. "This is what you asked for," she reminded herself. "Not the title. The becoming." She sent a single line reply. "I accept. Thank you for trusting me." Daniel found out the following Sunday, from a mutual acquaintance who congratulated him on Marsha's big step, as if he'd been involved in the decision. He smiled politely and nodded, the congratulations ringing faintly hollow. That evening, Daniel walked through his apartment, tidying without purpose. He stopped in the kitchen, hands braced against the counter, staring at nothing in particular. He was proud of her. That wasn't the issue. The issue was the realization, quiet, undeniable, that Marsha no longer needed him as a stabilizer. She was finding her own equilibrium. That was good. It was also terrifying. Marsha's first day as team lead felt like wearing a coat that didn't quite fit yet. Too stiff in the shoulders, too heavy in the sleeves. She arrived early, reviewed notes, anticipated questions. When her team assembled, 5 people all older than she was, she felt the flicker of doubt rise automatically. Then she did something new. She let it pass. "I want to start by saying this," Marsha said once everyone was seated. "I don't have all the answers, but I do know how to listen, and I know how to build systems that support people doing their best work." Heads nodded, shoulders eased. As the meeting progressed, Marsha found herself speaking with a calm authority that surprised her. Not assertive, not tentative. grounded. Afterward, Vivian stopped by her desk. You didn't overcompensate, Vivian observed. Marsha smiled. I didn't run away either. That, Vivian said, is growth. Aaron noticed the change first. They were cooking together in Marsha's kitchen on a Thursday evening. The window opened to let in the cooling spring air. He was chopping garlic, humming tunelessly, while Marsha stirred sauce at the stove. You seem taller, he said casually. She laughed. That's not physiologically possible. I know, he said. I just mean you take up more space lately. In a good way. She considered that. I think I am. And it doesn't scare you? He asked. It does, she admitted. But it doesn't paralyze me anymore. He smiled at that warm, unguarded. I like this version of you. She met his gaze, something inside her softening. Me too. Later, when he left, she noticed the quiet differently than she used to. Not hollow, just open. The conversation with Daniel happened because it needed to. No avoidance, no orchestration. They crossed paths leaving the cafe on a rainy Wednesday evening, umbrellas colliding in a moment of near comedy. Oh, Marsha said, startled. Hi. Hi, Daniel replied. They stood there, rain misting between them, eyes searching each other's faces for context. Do you have time? Daniel asked. She nodded. Yes. They walked without destination, umbrellas bobbing in uneven rhythm. The streets glistened, reflections blurring the sharp edges of the world. I heard about the team lead role, Daniel said finally. Marsha glanced at him. I should have told you. I'm not upset, he said quickly. Just aware. She smiled faintly. It's a big change. For you, he said. And maybe for us. She slowed to a stop beneath an awning, rain drumming softly above them. I don't want to lose you, Marsha said. But I also don't want to need you the way I used to. Daniel nodded. I wouldn't want that either. They stood there, the weight of years between them. Library tables, Sunday coffees, unspoken trust. So what do you want? He asked quietly. Marsha thought about it. Really thought. I want relationships that meet me where I am now, she said. Not where I was comfortable. Daniel smiled, bittersweet. Then I think we need to be honest about whether that's still true for us. She looked at him, heart steady despite the ache. Are you asking because you're afraid? She asked. Yes, he said. But also because I respect you. The answer mattered. They stood in silence for a long moment. I don't know what this becomes, Marsha said finally. But I don't want it to stagnate. Neither do I, Daniel said. If we're going to matter to each other, it has to be deliberate now. She nodded. Then let's let it be. He smiled gently. That sounds like something you'd say. She laughed softly. I'm becoming predictable. No, he said. You're becoming aligned. The podcast episode she recorded that week didn't outline tips or strategies. It was quieter than usual. I used to think growth meant adding, Marsha said into the mic. More confidence, more certainty, more clarity. But lately, it's looked more like subtraction. Letting go of roles I outgrew, expectations I never agreed to consciously. She paused, breathing. I'm learning that being deserving isn't about measuring up. It's about matching energy with effort, capacity with commitment. When the red light switched off, Marsha sat back and felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Peace. Not because everything was resolved, but because she wasn't waiting anymore. She was participating. And for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. Chapter 8. The honest choice. Marsha ended things with Aaron on a Sunday afternoon that smelled like rain. They sat at a small table by the window of a neighborhood restaurant she liked for its unpretentious menu and forgiving lighting. The food arrived untouched as she searched for words she refused to rush or soften past honesty. I want to say this right, she said finally. Aaron looked at her with the same calm attention he'd offered from the beginning. Take your time, she exhaled. Being with you has been easy, kind, grounded, and I don't regret any of it. I can tell there's a but, he said gently. Yes, she said, relieved he wasn't making her excavate alone. There's a part of me that hasn't fully arrived. Not because of you, because of me. He nodded slowly, absorbing it. You're not choosing someone else, are you? Marsha hesitated just enough to tell the truth mattered. I'm choosing clarity. Aaron smiled, real if a little sad. That tracks with you. I didn't want to drift into something good and realize too late that I was elsewhere emotionally, she said. That wouldn't be fair. He took a sip of water, then set the glass down carefully. I appreciate you not letting that happen. I'm sorry, she added. I know, he said. And I'm okay. They hugged goodbye, warm, respectful, complete. As Marsha walked home, she felt the sharpness of ending something kind, but not regret. What she felt, surprisingly, was alignment. She didn't call Daniel right away, not out of strategy, out of respect for herself, for him, for the gravity of what was shifting. She spent the evening in her apartment with the windows open, city sounds threading through her thoughts. She cooked a simple dinner, cleaned as she went, and noticed how grounded she felt inside her own skin. When her phone buzzed later that night, She smiled before she even saw the name. Daniel, are you free this week? There's something I'd like to talk about. Her heart didn't race. It steadied. Marsha. Yes. Tomorrow. Daniel. I'd like that. They met at the lake just after sunset, the water reflecting the sky in blurred bands of lavender and gray. Daniel stood near the railing, hands in his jacket pockets, posture relaxed but attentive. Hi, he said when she approached. Hi. They didn't hug. They didn't need to. They walked in silence for a bit, the comfort of shared quiet returning. Changed, but intact. I ended things with Aaron today, Marsha said eventually. Daniel absorbed it without reaction. How do you feel? Clear, she said. Sad, but clear. He nodded. Thank you for telling me. She glanced at him. Why did you want to talk? Daniel stopped walking. She followed suit, turning to face him. I've been trying to be very principled, he said. Give you space. Let you grow without interpreting every step as movement away from me. Marsha held her breath. But I realized something, he continued. Space only works if it's intentional. Otherwise, it becomes avoidance disguised as respect. She smiled faintly. That does sound like something you'd identify. He smiled back. I wanted to ask you something directly, without pressure. She waited. Are we circling something? Or are we letting it go out of fear of disrupting what's familiar? The question was steady. Brave. Offered, not demanded. Marsha felt it settle into her chest, joining the other truths she'd been collecting. I think we've always been aligned, she said slowly. We just decided quietly that alignment didn't need motion. Daniel's eyes softened. And now I don't want to be efficient with something that deserves intention, she said. I don't want to protect the idea of our friendship so carefully that we never risk discovering what else it could be. He exhaled, a sound like relief finding permission. I don't want to interfere with who you're becoming, he said. You don't, Marsha replied. You never have. They stood there, years of shared history humming between them, not as weight, but as foundation. Can I try something? Daniel asked. She nodded. I don't want to rush this, he said. No revisionist romance. No pretending we missed our moment and need to make up for lost time. That sounds wise, she said. I want to ask you on a date, he said. One that acknowledges who we are now. Marsha smiled, wide and genuine. I'd like that. He returned the smile. Not triumphant, not tentative. Just open. Their first date felt unlike any other either had experienced. Not electric. Not awkward. Honest. They chose a small wine bar neither had been to before, a symbolic neutral ground. They talked about work, about growth, about the strange experience of knowing someone deeply without having explored physical intimacy. At one point, Daniel laughed softly. You know what's strange? What? I don't feel behind, he said. I feel prepared. Marsha reached across the table and covered his hand. Not a grand gesture. Just confirmation. Me too. When they parted that evening, there was a brief moment of hesitation. Daniel leaned in, slow enough to stop, public enough to be respectful. She closed the distance. The kiss was gentle, familiar in a way that startled them both, not because it felt old, but because it felt inevitable. They pulled back, exchanging quiet laughter at the simplicity of it. Well, Daniel said, that answers that. Marsha smiled. It does. The episode Marsha recorded that week wasn't announced in advance. No teaser, no framing, just a title. Choosing honestly. I used to think uncertainty was a flaw, she said into the mic, but I've learned it's often a signal, an invitation to pause instead of pattern match. She spoke about alignment, about releasing narratives that no longer fit, about letting relationships evolve without forcing them to prove their worth prematurely. I didn't settle, she said clearly. I clarified. When she turned off the recording, she sat still and allowed herself to feel it, this quiet convergence of choices finally pointing in the same direction. Later that night, Daniel texted her. Daniel, dinner tomorrow? She didn't overthink it. Marsha, yes. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was waiting to deserve something. She had done the work. She had become the person who could receive it. And the honesty of that choice, made consciously, without fear, felt like the truest kind of romance she had ever known. Chapter 9, The Comfortable Truth. The morning Marsha woke up late felt like a victory. No anxiety. No jolt of self-reproach. Just sunlight nudging through the curtains and a quiet awareness that nothing would fall apart if she started the day imperfectly. She lay there for a moment, listening to the sound of Daniel moving around her kitchen. Soft footsteps, the rattle of the kettle, the faint clink of ceramic. He had stayed the night, not in a way that required explanation or dramatic adjustment. They had talked, laughed, kissed, slept, woken without urgency. When she padded into the kitchen, hair unbrushed, Daniel looked over his shoulder and smiled. Good morning, he said. Morning, she replied, leaning against the counter. Coffee's almost ready, he added. I took liberties. She glanced at the mugs he'd set out, hers filled with oat milk foam just the way she liked. You remembered. I pay attention, he said simply. Something in her chest eased, a long-held tension finally unhooking. They drank coffee side by side, not facing each other, gazes drifting out the window at the city stretching awake. It felt domestic without being presumptive, shared without being claimed. This feels different, Marsha said quietly. Daniel nodded. Different how? Not like a beginning, she said. More like continuity that finally decided to move. He smiled at that. I like thinking of it that way. The podcast episode went live that afternoon. Marsha didn't announce it with theatrics or teaser clips. No dramatic framing, no defensive disclaimers. Just the title and a brief description. The comfortable truth. She recorded it in one take. I used to think comfort was the enemy, she began. Something that dulled ambition or settled for less. But I've learned there's a difference between stagnation and safety. She spoke clearly, calmly, not trying to persuade, just to articulate. I chased certainty for a long time. And before that, I chased potential in people who had no interest in building anything. I confused being wanted with being chosen. She paused long enough to let silence do its work. The truth is, the most meaningful shifts in my life didn't feel electrifying. They felt steady, earned, like something clicking into place because the groundwork was already there. She talked about values instead of checklists, about contribution instead of extraction, about desire that wasn't rooted in fear of being alone or validation from others. I didn't lower my standards, she said, voice quiet but firm. I raised my awareness. When the red light went dark, Marsha sat back and smiled. Not because she expected approval, but because she'd said the thing cleanly. The response was slower this time, thoughtful, measured. There were still critics, there always would be, but they no longer felt personal. The emails and messages that mattered most came from women who sounded like they were exhaling for the first time in years. I didn't realize how much I was performing when dating until you named it. I broke up with someone I was trying to convince myself to want. I stopped waiting to feel chosen and started asking what kind of partner I actually want to be. Marsha read them all, a quiet gratitude settling into her bones. That evening, Vivian stopped by her office on her way out. I listened to your episode, Vivian said casually. Marsha raised an eyebrow. You did. I did, Vivian said. It was grounded. Marsha smiled. That's a compliment from you. It is, Vivian confirmed. You sound like someone who trusts herself. Marsha felt the truth of it, not as bravado but as recognition. Daniel met her outside the building afterward, hands in his coat pockets, a familiar silhouette that somehow looked new. Walk? He asked. She nodded. They strolled without destination, the way they always had. But now each step felt intentional rather than assumed. So, he said after a while, how does it feel having put it all out there? Lighter, Marsha said. I'm not teaching from theory anymore. He smiled. You never really were. You just didn't know you were evolving. They stopped near the river, the water moving steadily past them. Unimpressed by milestones, unconcerned with timing. I'm glad we didn't rush, Daniel said. So am I, Marsha replied. We grew into this. He studied her face. Are you afraid it will change now that it's named? She thought about it. Really thought. No, she said. I think naming it frees it from expectation. He laughed softly. Trust you to find the least romantic and most reassuring phrasing. She nudged his shoulder. You like it? I do. 6 months later, Marsha stood in her apartment studio recording a live audience episode for the first time. The space was small but packed, the energy warm rather than electric. Daniel sat off to the side, unobtrusive, present without needing to be seen. During the Q&A, a woman near the back raised her hand. How do you know when you shouldn't settle? She asked, versus when you're just scared. Marsha smiled, recognizing an earlier version of herself in the question. You notice where your energy goes, she said. If you're constantly managing disappointment, you're probably settling. If you're steady but growing, changed in ways that feel earned, you're probably just scared. The woman nodded slowly. Afterward, as the room cleared, Daniel approached Marsha, pride unmistakable but unshowy. You were good, he said. So were you, she replied without irony. He raised an eyebrow. I sat in a chair. You've always been good at the non-obvious work, she said. That night, back in her apartment, Marsha leaned against Daniel on the couch, feet tucked beneath her, city lights glowing beyond the glass. You know, she said, tracing the seam of his sleeve, I spent years thinking love was something you found. Daniel tilted his head. And now I think it's something you build once you stop trying to audition for it. He kissed the top of her head, slow and unremarkable in the best way. Somewhere in the city, trams ran on schedule. People moved through their lives. Nothing paused for the clarity Marsha had earned. And that was exactly the point. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was choosing carefully, consciously, and with a steady heart what to build next. And for the first time, the truth felt less like a challenge, and more like home. Chapter 10. The work you keep. The thing Marsha noticed first was how ordinary her happiness felt. Not dull, not muted, just integrated. She was standing in line at the bakery on a Saturday morning, half awake, hair twisted into a negligent knot, when the thought landed without ceremony. This is my life now. No dramatic reveal. No cinematic swell of music. Just quiet recognition. She ordered 2 pastries she didn't intend to finish and stepped outside, sunlight warming her face. As she reached for her phone to text Daniel, she paused. Not because she questioned reaching out, but because she smiled at how natural the impulse felt. Marsha, croissants happened. Come help me justify them? The reply came before she reached the corner. Daniel, I'll bring coffee and moral flexibility. She laughed out loud, earning a curious glance from a passerby she didn't care to interpret. 3 months into dating Daniel, actually dating with intention rather than inertia, Marsha learned that love didn't arrive as subtraction from her life. It added in quiet ways. Daniel didn't try to optimize her time or reorient her routines. He fit. Not perfectly, not magically, but with effort that matched hers. They scheduled dinners and protected mornings. They disagreed gently and talked without scoring points. When she canceled one night because a team issue blew up late, he said, "Handle your world. I'll be here," and meant it. She noticed how different that felt from tolerance. At work, her leadership role bent her in new directions. Sometimes she came home exhausted, brain buzzing with decisions and responsibility. Daniel learned when to ask questions and when to leave food in the fridge with a note that read, "I made too much on purpose." Vivian observed the changes with satisfaction that never tipped into interference. "You don't apologize before speaking anymore," she remarked one afternoon. Marsha blinked. "Did I used to?" "Yes," Vivian said. "Not verbally, energetically." Marsha smiled. "I think I stopped asking permission." The podcast continued to evolve. Marsha stopped framing episodes as advice and started framing them as conversations, sometimes with guests, sometimes alone. She spoke less about good men and more about mutual capacity, less about standards and more about skills. The numbers fluctuated. So did the feedback. For the first time, she didn't chase either. One evening, after recording an episode about emotional literacy, she sat on the couch beside Daniel, her head resting against his shoulder, laptop closed. "I used to think clarity meant having the answer," she said. "And now?" he asked. "Now I think it means knowing the question is allowed to change," she replied. Daniel smiled, kissing her temple. "You're good at learning out loud." She laughed. "You once called my podcast The Blind Teaching the Deaf to Read Sheet Music. I stand by that as an early draft," he said. "You've done revisions since." They didn't rush milestones. When friends asked where they were headed, Marsha noticed the way the question no longer activated her defensiveness. "Forward," she said simply. Some Sundays still looked like coffee at the old cafe. Others didn't. The ritual had shifted from requirement to choice, and somehow that made it stronger. One rainy evening, curled together on the couch, Daniel said, "You know what I appreciate most about us?" Marsha tilted her head. "What?" "We didn't turn history into obligation," he said. "We let it become context." She smiled, something warm blooming behind her ribs. "That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said." "I contain multitudes," he replied gravely. She laughed, the sound easy and full. The live event invitation came unexpectedly. A small conference for modern media creators reached out, asking Marsha to host a panel on authenticity and audience trust. She read the email twice, then forwarded it to Daniel with a single line. "Is this terrifying or exciting?" His response was immediate. "Both. That's how you know it's right." She accepted. The panel went well. Not because Marsha dazzled, but because she listened. She spoke honestly about her missteps, her corrections, her discomfort with being positioned as an authority when she was still very much a participant. Afterward, a woman approached her. "I followed you for years," the woman said. "I stopped for a while when it felt like you were angry. I came back when it felt like you were curious." Marsha nodded. "That feels fair." As she exited the building later, Daniel fell into step beside her without comment, matching her pace. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Content." He smiled. "You wear it well." The truth, that comfortable, unglamorous truth Marsha had once feared, was this. She hadn't gotten everything she imagined at 27. She'd gotten something better. A life that fit her without requiring contortion. Work that stretched her without erasing her. A partner who didn't complete her but complemented the shape she'd grown into on her own. Love didn't arrive as validation. It arrived as collaboration. One evening, months later, as they washed dishes together, Daniel drying and Marsha rinsing, she realized she hadn't thought about deserving in a long time. She had been busy doing, building, choosing, showing up. "Daniel?" she said. "Yes. Thank you for asking me questions I didn't know how to answer yet." He glanced at her, towel paused mid-air. "Thank you for answering them anyway." She smiled. Maybe happiness wasn't fireworks or certainty or triumph. Maybe it was this shared work, chosen honestly, sustained with care. And for Marsha Rose, that felt like the truest ending imaginable.